My wife threw my dinner in the trash. That's when I realized what I really was to her, and then It was one of those nights where exhaustion feels stitched into your bones. I just finished a 13-hour shift at the warehouse. Half my coworkers had called out again, so the supervisor asked if I could stay and help cover the load. Translation: do the job of 3 men for a barely legal paycheck. My head pounded, my feet felt like raw meat, and I hadn't eaten since some sorry leftover pasta I'd microwaved around noon. I was supposed to have leftovers for dinner too, but I had a pretty solid guess they were still sitting untouched in the fridge if they hadn't already made their way into the trash. I stopped at a Shell station on the way home, grabbed a couple of those overpriced turkey sandwiches, a bag of salt and vinegar chips, and 2 bottled sodas. One for me, one for Delilah. We didn't have the budget for real takeout anymore, but I figured maybe the thought would count for something. I hadn't seen my emergency fund dip below $1,000 in years, but after pulling out another $80 this week to cover rent she forgot to send, again, it now sat at a depressing $712. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that we'd rebound soon, but temporary had become permanent and rebound was starting to look like a fairy tale. When I walked through the door at 8:40, the place smelled like stale laundry and last night's pizza crust. Delilah was on the couch, half wrapped in a blanket, scrolling through her phone like she hadn't moved since sunrise. The blinds were closed, the dishes from Tuesday still festering in the sink, and the trash was overflowing with takeout containers she insisted were too spicy to finish. I didn't say anything about the mess. I'd said plenty the last few weeks, and each time had ended in some variety of screaming, tears, or accusations about how I didn't appreciate how much she was managing during the day. I dropped the gas station bag on the coffee table, mumbled something about grabbing a quick dinner, and went to loosen my boots. She glanced up for half a second, looked down at the sandwiches, and then let out this sharp little laugh. "Wow," she said, not even trying to sound amused. "You really know how to make poverty taste worse." Before I could even react, she pushed everything off the table with one wide sweep of her arm. The sodas exploded on contact with the floor, one rolling under the couch, hissing syrup and fizz as it went. "Try again tomorrow, idiot." I froze. I didn't yell, didn't curse or storm out. I just stood there staring at the sandwich now lying face down on the carpet like a crime scene victim. Something inside me didn't just snap, it settled. Everything I'd been denying, excusing, ignoring, it all lined up at once like puzzle pieces finally fitting together after years of trying to force the wrong corners. I wasn't a husband. I was a debit card that did dishes and sometimes got to sleep in the same bed as her if she wasn't too annoyed. We'd been married 4 years, and in that entire time, I'd covered every bill, every emergency, every little splurge she insisted was for her mental health. At first, she was between jobs. Then she was exploring her passions. Then the job market was tough. Then she was burned out. Always something. Always a reason she couldn't contribute, but somehow never a reason she could scale back her spending. I'd put nearly $200,000 into our lives since we said, "I do." She'd maybe put in $18,000 total, all of it from that brief period where she was working part-time at a digital marketing firm before deciding the office wasn't aligned with her values. But it wasn't just the money. It was how I came home to clutter and silence every day, how the fridge was empty by Wednesday, and the laundry only got done when I finally snapped and did it myself. It was the way she turned every conversation about budgets into a shouting match about how I didn't support her growth and was afraid of a woman who knew her worth. I started to question if I was losing my mind, if expecting someone to pay a bill on time or do a load of towels was really as demanding as she made it seem. But that night, when the food hit the carpet and her words hung in the air like poison, something flipped in my brain. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I walked back out, got in my car, and drove. No destination. No plan. Just me, the road, and my thoughts finally refusing to be pushed aside anymore. Eventually, I ended up in the parking lot of an all-night grocery store on the far side of town, the kind with humming lights and sticky carts. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, just breathing. That was the night I realized I was done. Not just done with her behavior, but done pretending that the life I was living was anything close to love. I was tired of living like a stranger in my own house, of feeling like the enemy whenever I tried to talk about basic responsibilities. I was tired of being told I was cheap because I didn't want to throw away another $100 on clothes she'd wear once or skin cream that promised emotional clarity. I didn't go back that night. I just stayed in the car, answering none of her calls. First she texted asking where I was. Then she said she was scared. Then that I was overreacting. Then, finally, she was sorry and didn't mean it. The usual cycle. This time, though, I wasn't interested in repeating it. I sat there doing cold math. Not emotional math. Not hopeful math. Real, cold math. I'd paid over $190,000 into our lives. She'd contributed a tenth of that. We were $7,800 in credit card debt that I didn't even know existed until I dug through our joint statements the week before. My emergency fund had gone from nearly $10,000 to less than $800, all because I was the only one trying to keep the ship from sinking while she danced on the deck. I knew, sitting there with my stomach empty and my ears ringing, that I was done waiting for things to change. That night, I wasn't just sleeping in my car because I needed space. I was sleeping in my car because I needed to breathe. Because for the first time in 4 years, I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to plan my way out. By the time the sun cracked over the parking lot and started warming the windshield, I already knew what I had to do. My body ached from trying to sleep upright in the car, my neck kinked and back sore. But for the first time in months, my mind was sharper than ever. I drove straight to a credit union across town. One Delilah wouldn't even recognize, still wearing yesterday's work clothes, reeking of stale soda and exhaustion. The woman behind the desk took one look at me and didn't ask questions when I said I needed accounts my wife couldn't touch. She just nodded, handed me a clipboard, and said, "Take your time." That moment hit me harder than expected, the quiet confirmation that whatever was happening in my life, it wasn't rare. She'd seen this before, probably too many times. I opened a new checking and a separate savings, told them not to mail anything to the house, and made sure my direct deposit would route to the new account before my next paycheck hit. Then I went home and slept on the couch in a dead silence. Not because Delilah was gone, but because she wasn't even awake to ask where I'd been. When I finally woke up, I pulled my laptop from under the coffee table, cleared off the leftover crumbs and receipts, and started working. Not on a resume, not on job listings, on the financial autopsy of my marriage. I downloaded every statement we had for the past 4 years. Credit cards, checking accounts, old PayPal transactions, Venmo receipts, store cards I didn't even know she had opened. I built out spreadsheets color-coded by year and category: utilities, rent, groceries, gas, gifts, streaming services, beauty supplies, clothing, food delivery, and a massive block titled Unexplained Charges. 3 hours in, my stomach was tight with nausea and adrenaline. I was staring at thousands of dollars in purchases I had never approved, never even heard about. In the past 12 months alone, Delilah had spent nearly $12,000 on herself: makeup, boutique clothes, designer shoes, perfume, and spa visits, all while insisting we were broke and needed to be more careful. I had assumed we were scraping by together. Turns out, I was scraping while she burned through cash like it came with a cheat code. I found 3 Amazon orders for new Bluetooth speakers in 1 month. Why did we need 3? I never saw them. Found out later she gave them away as just because gifts to her friends. Friends I hadn't seen in our apartment since the wedding. We were also in $8,300 of credit card debt, and I hadn't seen a single one of those bills. She'd set up paperless statements and logged everything into her own folders. I found one of her secret folders still open on my browser from earlier that week. That was the moment I realized she hadn't just lied by omission. She'd actively concealed financial ruin behind my back. I printed everything, color-coded each page with sticky tabs, and labeled each section by year and category. The binder was 2 inches thick when I finished, and I stared at it like it was a confession. I thought I might cry or scream or punch a wall, but all I felt was quiet clarity. I finally understood the pattern I'd been too tired, too worn down to see. 3 days passed before I said a word to her. During that time, Delilah suddenly transformed into a step-forward wife. The apartment was spotless. She made my favorite beef stew from scratch, even lit a stupid candle on the table like we were on a date. She'd clearly noticed the silence and the missed texts. I didn't react, just ate in silence and went to bed early, alone. I waited until the next evening, when we were both home and the TV was off, and laid the binder flat on the kitchen table in front of her. She laughed nervously, like I was showing her a weird fan theory about some show she didn't care about. Then she saw the labels and the highlighter marks. Then the color drained from her face. "I know," I said, voice low and calm. "I know about all of it. The credit cards, the secret accounts, the delivery apps, the monthly shopping sprees. I know about the excuses and the lies, and I know that this marriage is no longer a partnership. I've been doing this alone while you told yourself a story where I was the villain." She didn't speak for 30 full seconds, just blinked like her brain had disconnected. Then the performance began. First the tears, wet and fast, but without any real confusion. She knew exactly what I'd discovered. She tried to reach for my hand, but I didn't offer it. Then came the phase 2 tactic, blame. "I didn't think you'd understand. You're so tight with money, so cold sometimes." I flipped to page 23 and read aloud 3 different promises she'd made about looking for a job. All broken, all dated. She called me controlling, said I was weaponizing money to hurt her, that I was making her feel unsafe by laying out her own spending habits. It was surreal hearing her twist the facts like that, trying to gaslight me with a voice still shaky from crocodile tears. But this time I didn't argue. I didn't get loud. I let the binder talk for me. I told her I had redirected my paycheck, that I would be covering only my half of rent, utilities, and essentials from now on. Anything beyond that was her responsibility. Her eyes flickered, not fear, but calculation. She was trying to assess how serious I was, if this was just another bluff in one of our ongoing fights. But I wasn't bluffing anymore. The version of me who forgave, excused, absorbed, and enabled, he died in a parking lot 3 nights ago. That night, I moved into the tiny spare room we used for storage, cleared the boxes, rolled out a camping mattress, grabbed my old laptop, a stack of clothes, and a pillow. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Delilah didn't come in once. I think she was stunned. She'd always been able to manipulate me back into position, make me feel guilty for being tired, make me feel small for asking where the money went, make me feel like less of a man for not wanting to buy her another pair of boots when our electric bill was overdue. But now she had nothing to stand on, no leverage left. The air in the apartment felt different, lighter, quieter, like the tension had been cut with a knife and the pressure had been released. The next few days were strange. She cycled through moods like she was auditioning for a role, sweet and remorseful one day, passive-aggressive and silent the next, then suddenly pragmatic and eager to talk about job-hunting strategies. I didn't take the bait. I gave her short answers when necessary and disappeared into the spare room when I didn't feel like talking. That strategy worked better than I expected. I later found out the internet calls it gray rocking, becoming so boring and non-reactive that the manipulator loses interest. All I knew was that for the first time in years, I wasn't being dragged into drama I didn't ask for. The real shift came about a week in, when the joint money started drying up. I heard her in the living room trying to order from one of those expensive vegan places she liked, and her card got declined. She tried 2 more, same result. That night, she stormed into the kitchen and demanded to know what I'd done. I calmly told her that from now on, we both paid 50% of shared expenses, and if she wanted more, she'd need to contribute. Her face went through 5 expressions in the span of a breath: shock, denial, fury, confusion, then finally this hollow kind of realization. The next morning, she left a note on the counter. Said she was staying at Tessa's place for a few days to process everything. Took a suitcase, her laptop, and enough clothes for a week. I watched her walk to the rideshare through the window without saying a word. When the door closed behind her, I sat on the floor of the empty apartment, leaned my head back against the wall, and exhaled. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like oxygen. like someone had finally opened the window in a room I didn't realize was choking me. I wasn't naive enough to believe it was over, but I knew for sure it had finally begun. 3 days passed without a single word from Delilah, and the apartment settled into a silence I hadn't heard in years. No background TV noise droning into the night, no passive-aggressive sighs from the kitchen, no demands about dinner plans or what I did with the leftovers. Just stillness. I kept to a routine, woke up early, brewed my own coffee, logged into work from the dining table, and ended each day with a jog around the block followed by cheap frozen dinners that didn't get thrown in the trash. It felt surreal, like I had slipped into some alternate version of my life where I wasn't constantly walking on emotional landmines. Then one afternoon, I got a call from Tessa. I didn't answer, let it roll to voicemail, and played the message on speaker just in case she said something useful. She didn't say much, only that Delilah was really upset and trying to figure things out. I wasn't surprised. Delilah was probably spinning some dramatic narrative about how I'd abandoned her or tried to punish her emotionally. What I didn't expect came later that night, when a private number texted me a folder of screenshots. The message simply read, "You deserve to know." I opened it out of curiosity, not expecting anything significant. What I found nearly made me drop the phone. Tessa had sent me months' worth of group chat logs between Delilah and some of her friends, messages full of smug comments and laughing emojis. In one, Delilah bragged about how she'd trained me to never ask questions about money. Another post showed a picture of her shopping bags captioned, "Another haul. He thinks I've been cutting back, lol." The worst part wasn't the spending, it was the disdain. She wasn't just taking advantage of me, she was proud of it. There were texts where she made fun of me for budgeting, called me boring for staying home, and said she could do way better once the timing was right. Like I was a stepping stone or a practice run before she leveled up. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat there, staring at the screen while this weird wave of vindication washed over me. For years, I questioned whether I was being too harsh, too uptight, too frugal, too controlling. Turns out, I was just the only adult in the relationship. I backed up all the screenshots, added them to the same folder as the financial spreadsheets and binder scans, then forwarded everything to my lawyer. She responded in under an hour, told me it was excellent documentation, and that I was more than justified in filing for separation on grounds of financial and emotional manipulation. 2 days later, Delilah reached out. She wanted to meet for coffee, somewhere public, she said, to talk things through like adults. I picked a place near my job, made sure it was bright and busy with plenty of witnesses in case things went sideways. When she showed up, I almost didn't recognize her. She wore that deep green sweater she knew I liked, hair done, makeup flawless, and an air of practiced sorrow that couldn't have been more staged if she'd hired a director. She ordered a $12 latte like she hadn't just spent the last 2 weeks sobbing to her friends about being broke. The performance began immediately. She dabbed her eyes with a napkin before even sitting down, gave a sad smile, and said she just wanted to understand where things went wrong. I didn't speak until she ran out of steam, didn't react when she mentioned how Jordan from work had been supportive lately, or how people were noticing how thin she'd gotten from all the stress. It was a carefully scripted mix of pity bait and jealousy tactics. When she finally paused long enough for me to respond, I slid a manila folder across the table. Inside was the separation agreement. My lawyer had drawn it up with exact financial splits, renters, no kids, debts divided by who accrued them, assets evenly split, and the joint account frozen. Delilah didn't even look at the paperwork. She just blinked slowly, then said, "We don't need to do this. We can still fix it if you stop being so petty about money." That was her default word, petty. She used it whenever I brought up the fact that she hadn't paid a bill in months or ordered sushi while I skipped lunch to afford our car insurance. I told her, calmly, that the agreement was more than fair, that I was even offering to take on a larger share of the debt, despite it being almost entirely her doing, that if she signed it, we could part ways peacefully and be done. If not, she could drag it into court, spend every last cent of her allowance from her parents on legal fees, and still lose. She called me cold. She said I was selfish, unforgiving, small. but her voice shook just enough to betray her panic. She didn't think I'd really go through with it. She thought this was another bluff, another boundary I'd cave on like all the others. I didn't. I stood up halfway through her third round of tears, told her I hoped she found whatever it was she was looking for, and walked out while she was still mid-sentence. Behind me, I heard a chair scrape the floor too hard and someone awkwardly coughing as the room shifted uncomfortably around her. The next few weeks were strange. On the surface, my life didn't look that different. I still worked, still shopped at discount grocery stores, still jogged in the evenings. But internally, everything was changing. I could sleep again. I wasn't clenching my jaw in the middle of the night or waking up drenched in panic because the credit card bill might be higher than expected. I didn't dread going home anymore. It was quiet, yes, and a little empty, but the emptiness was peaceful instead of tense. There was no one judging me for reheating leftovers, no one tossing my food in the garbage or calling me pathetic because I didn't want to DoorDash tacos at 2 a.m. Then, out of nowhere, Delilah signed the paperwork. She dropped it in my mailbox without a note, every page flagged and initialed, no changes requested. My lawyer called me to confirm it was real and legal, and we set the final court date. I was stunned. For weeks she'd fought me, insulted me, guilt-tripped me. Then she just gave up? It didn't make sense. Until I got a message from Tessa again. Heads up, she wrote. She met someone. Rich. Fancy car. Thinks she's tragic and misunderstood. She's moving in with him next week. And just like that, it made perfect sense. Delilah hadn't given in because she saw the light or felt remorse. She gave in because she found another host. I should have felt furious or humiliated, but all I felt was this weird wave of relief. She was someone else's problem now. Someone else could foot the bills, listen to the endless excuses, and get called cheap for refusing to pay for another weekend getaway for the sake of our connection. She'd moved on like I'd been nothing, and honestly, that helped me move on too. I didn't even respond to her last message, which was a vague, passive-aggressive, hope you find happiness, even if you don't deserve it. I blocked her number the next day. I moved into a studio across town, a little rough around the edges, but clean, quiet, and fully mine. I furnished it with secondhand stuff, used my remaining emergency fund to replace what I lost, and downloaded a budgeting app that didn't feel like a punishment. The divorce became final a few weeks later. No court drama, no drawn-out legal fights. Just a quiet stamp on a piece of paper that said the thing I already knew in my bones. This chapter was over, and I was finally free. I figured that once the ink dried on the divorce papers, she'd disappear entirely, vanish into whatever luxury fairy tale she thought she deserved, safely cushioned by the wallet of her newest admirer. For a little while, that's exactly what seemed to happen. Weeks went by without a single message, not even a passive-aggressive email or a vague social media post about betrayal. I used the quiet to get my life back in order, started cooking more, reconnected with a few old friends Delilah had deemed toxic, and even bought tickets to see a band I used to love back when I still did things just for me. The apartment was slowly becoming more than just a place I slept. It was becoming home. Then, out of nowhere, she resurfaced. The first message came late on a Tuesday night. Hey, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I miss talking to you. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later. I feel like we never got closure. Maybe we could meet? Just talk. Still nothing from me. The third message hit a few hours later, after midnight. You're really just going to ignore me after everything we've been through? That one was followed by silence. For about 12 hours. Then the call started. Private numbers, voicemails that started off soft and apologetic before spiraling into insults and wild accusations. It was like flipping through the stages of grief, but with a personal vendetta attached to each one. I didn't answer. I documented every message. My lawyer had warned me this might happen, told me to expect an explosion once the reality of financial independence hit her like a brick wall. According to Tessa, who'd apparently finally run out of patience, Delilah had burned through the hospitality of her new host pretty quickly. Turns out rich guys with nice watches still expect you to contribute something other than attitude and drama. After 2 months of freeloading and stirring chaos in his social circle, she got kicked out of his condo, and landed back on her parents' doorstep. The very same parents she'd spent years calling narcissistic and controlling. She was furious, not just at them, but at me, at the world, at the simple fact that her ability to charm her way through life had finally worn thin. When none of her messages got a response from me, she tried reaching out to my sister, someone she had once claimed was emotionally unstable and manipulative. My sister sent me screenshots and blocked her immediately. Then came the Instagram posts, vague quotes about betrayal, strength, rebirth, each one more unhinged than the last. I didn't follow her, but people sent them to me anyway. Everyone loves a train wreck, especially one they've been watching in slow motion for years. The post that really broke the facade was a GoFundMe. Recovering from emotional abuse and rebuilding my life after financial control and narcissistic trauma. That was the title. The goal? $40,000. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. She'd spent 4 years draining my bank account, lying through her teeth, ridiculing me for being frugal, and now she was playing the victim to strangers online for sympathy donations. What killed me most was that some people actually gave. Not a lot, but enough to feed the delusion that she'd done nothing wrong. Then, a week later, another bomb dropped. I got a call from my buddy Holden, who'd helped me move the day I picked up my things from the apartment. He sounded almost gleeful. "You're not going to believe this, man. She's engaged again." I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it like it had grown teeth. Engaged? To who? Some guy named Malcolm. Owns a vape shop in Dayton. Met her 3 months ago and thinks she's been through hell. I checked her Instagram, and sure enough, there it was, a perfectly filtered photo of her hand in front of a wine glass, showing off a ring that looked suspiciously like the one I'd bought her. Same cut, same setting, but maybe with slightly more sparkle to impress the few followers she had left. It took everything in me not to comment. Not to send Malcolm a friendly warning message or forward him a copy of the spreadsheets and screenshots that documented the implosion of our marriage. But I didn't. Some lessons you only learn the hard way. I closed the app, turned off my phone, and went back to sautéing vegetables in my tiny kitchen with the window open and some jazz playing from my laptop. Peace isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and kind of boring. But after 4 years of chaos, boring tasted better than anything else in the world. That peace held for a while, long enough for me to start feeling like a person again. I picked up extra hours at work, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to. I liked being productive again without the fear of coming home to a war zone. I got my emergency fund back over 1,000, signed up for a community rec league on Tuesdays, and started dating again. Not seriously, just testing the waters, meeting people without the pressure to impress or provide. I'd forgotten how different it felt to be treated with curiosity instead of expectation. But, of course, the calm never lasts forever when people like Delilah are involved. 2 months after her engagement post, she showed up at my building. I don't know how she found the address. Maybe she checked my mail before the forward fully kicked in. Maybe she asked someone I hadn't warned. But she was there, standing in front of my door with a duffel bag and a fake smile. "I just need a place to crash for a couple of days. Malcolm and I are working through some stuff." I didn't say a word, just closed the door. I watched her shadow through the peephole for a few minutes while she stood there, probably waiting for me to fold. When it became clear I wasn't going to, she finally left. I texted my lawyer that night. We drafted a cease and desist notice the next morning and mailed it certified. She didn't show up again. The next time I heard her name was through Tessa again, months later. Malcolm had dumped her, took back the ring, blocked her number, deleted every photo they had together. According to Tessa, Delilah was now living in her cousin's basement and trying to launch a coaching business online. Life transformation coaching. I had to walk away from my desk at work to laugh it out properly. The woman who couldn't pay rent or heat up leftovers was now selling herself as an expert on life balance and empowerment. You can't make this stuff up. And yet, despite all of it, the lies, the manipulation, the shamelessness, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just distance. Like I'd read a wild novel, and the story had ended, and now the characters were fading from my memory. I no longer had the urge to correct the narrative or seek justice. I had what I needed: my freedom, my clarity, and the undeniable truth that I hadn't been crazy or cruel or controlling. I'd just finally woken up. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't anything you say or do. It's simply surviving them, thriving without them, living quietly and well. I have no idea what she's doing now. I don't care. She blocked me on everything after the coaching thing flopped. Maybe because it was easier than answering questions about why she needed donations for healing while flaunting ring number 2. Or maybe she finally realized I wasn't coming back, that the ATM had been permanently closed. Either way, I hope she never figures out how good my life has gotten without her. It's strange how quickly the extraordinary can become ordinary once you've been freed from the chaos long enough to breathe. That first morning I woke up in my own place. No drama, no passive-aggressive silence, no crushing guilt over an unpaid bill. Something inside me finally settled. The room was still mostly unfurnished, just a mattress on the floor and a thrift store table I'd picked up for $20, but it felt like a palace. The absence of her presence was louder than any argument we'd ever had, and in that silence, I started to rediscover what peace actually felt like. The little things hit hardest. I could leave dishes in the sink overnight without being accused of setting us back 5 years as adults. I could spend $10 on Chinese takeout without being guilt-tripped for wasting money, while she ordered $70 of sushi behind my back. I started cooking more, trying recipes I hadn't attempted in years. It turns out I actually like cooking, just not when it felt like a performance for someone who would roll her eyes at the results. I bought a Bluetooth speaker, played music while I cleaned, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my home was filled with sound that didn't echo off tension. My job, once just a place I clocked in and out of with mechanical dread, started feeling bearable again. Without the financial pressure gnawing at my stomach, I could breathe. I signed up for a night class in project management, something I'd put off for years because we couldn't afford it, while she somehow always had the latest phone or skincare set. I started seeing friends again, people I hadn't spoken to in years because she'd labeled them bad influences or immature. One of them, Jared, actually cried when I showed up at his birthday dinner. Said he thought I was gone for good, that Delilah had locked me in some mental cage and swallowed the key. But the moment that really sealed it, the one that made me realize I was on the other side of something monumental, came completely out of nowhere. I was walking through the farmer's market downtown on a quiet Sunday morning, sipping a coffee and browsing fresh produce like someone who actually had a handle on their life, when I bumped into Lena. We'd gone to college together, barely kept in touch after graduation, but there she was, laughing with a friend, carrying a bag of apples and a bouquet of sunflowers. She recognized me instantly, waved, came over, and we spent 20 minutes catching up like no time had passed at all. We met again the next week for lunch, then again the week after that, and before long it became regular. Not forced, not fast, just comfortable. She listened when I talked. Not the kind of listening where someone is waiting to speak, but real, focused attention. I told her about the divorce, the chaos, the ridiculous GoFundMe, and she didn't flinch or pity me, just nodded and said, "That sounds exhausting. I'm glad you're out of it." There were no games, no manipulation, no cryptic texts or mood swings. Just easy conversation and laughter that didn't come with strings attached. She wasn't a savior. I didn't need one. But she was the first person in years who didn't make me feel like a failure for wanting something simple and honest. I was still rebuilding, still figuring out who I was outside of being someone else's support system. But for once, I wasn't doing it alone or under a microscope. And that, more than anything, made all the difference. We weren't rushing toward anything, just walking, step by step, in the same direction. As for Delilah, the last I heard, she tried to pivot her coaching business into something called luxury mindset therapy, but it didn't stick. Too many refunds, too many bad reviews from people who saw through the performance. Her parents stopped helping entirely, and last I checked, courtesy of one final message from Tessa, she'd moved out of state to live with a cousin she'd barely spoken to in years. I didn't bother finding out where. Her orbit no longer intersected with mine. She was a closed book on a shelf I never wanted to open again. There were moments, of course, when the weight of it all would still sneak up on me. I'd be watching a movie and hear a line she'd once thrown at me in an argument. I'd find an old t-shirt I thought I'd lost and remember how she said I looked cheap in it. But the difference now was that those memories didn't crush me. They passed through like echoes in a hallway, fading faster each time. Healing, I've learned, isn't some dramatic event where you wake up reborn. It's slow, subtle, and full of small wins, like buying yourself flowers because no one else will, or sleeping through the night without flinching at imaginary footsteps in the hallway. A few weeks ago, I hit a quiet milestone. My emergency fund passed the 3,000 mark. Not a massive amount, but enough to make me feel like the ground under my feet was solid again. I remember transferring the last 100 into savings and just staring at the confirmation screen for a while, overwhelmed by how something so small could mean so much. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing, building, slowly shaping a life I wouldn't want to escape from. A life that felt like mine. I still don't know how I put up with it for so long. Sometimes I reread my own earlier posts and don't recognize the version of myself who wrote them. The man who stayed silent while his dinner hit the carpet, who slept in a storage room while his wife burned through credit cards behind his back. But I also don't shame him. He was trying. He believed people could change. He thought love meant carrying burdens until your back broke. I know better now. These days, I tip my delivery drivers 25%. I ask cashiers how their shift is going. I return shopping carts even when it's raining. Not because I'm trying to prove anything, but because kindness should never be transactional. Because I remember what it felt like to give and be told it was never enough. And I swore that once I got out, I'd be better, not bitter. That I'd take what I learned and use it to build something worth keeping. So here I am, single, steady, surrounded by peace, and slowly rebuilding my life one paycheck, one conversation, one quiet night at a time. I don't know what's next, and for once, I'm okay with that. The chaos is behind me. The silence ahead doesn't scare me anymore. It sounds like freedom.